Right, it's no secret that I like the Flood. But come on, we all knew that by now. So, to celebrate my 23-year-long love affair with the Flood, I thought we'd do something special, something big. Today, we're going over every single Flood outbreak that has ever happened in Halo's lore.
He's got a steel chair!
From 2559 to all the way back before 107,000 BC. This is the most comprehensive overview of the parasite and its outbreaks ever made. So equip your class 12 combat skin and chamber another shotgun shell. It's time to begin. Starting from the top, the first ever Flood outbreak occurred over 100,000 years ago, before humanity as we know it ever even existed. The precise year that it began has unfortunately been lost to time, but the librarian suggested that it began centuries before the humans engaged with the Foreigners, which happened in 107,445 BC. So, for the sake of argument, let's say 108,000 BC. This was the era where the galaxy was primarily dominated by the Foreigners and Ancient Humans, but the Ancient Prophets were a pretty major player as well. The Ancient Humans and Prophets shared a close alliance, but although they weren't yet enemies, the Foreigners weren't exactly fond of the humans. The reason for this was also the same reason the first ever Flood outbreak occurred. So 10 million years prior, the Precursors, the eldritch-like gods of the Halo universe who created all life in existence, chose to pass over the Foreigners in favour of humanity to inherit their mantle of responsibility, and thus inherit dominion over the galaxy. Bitter at being chosen over their rivals, the Foreigners retaliated in an act of genocide, exterminating almost every Precursor in existence in a violent uprising. Of the few Precursors who escaped, some ground themselves down into a desiccated powder which, over time, would allow themselves to be reborn as they once were. They stored this powder in millions of vials on ancient ships outside of the galaxy, and it was left for almost 10 million years. It was nowhere to be seen. Until, roughly, 108,000 BC, when these ships of unknown origin finally returned to the galaxy and crash-landed on human colonies. Having no idea what it was or where it came from, ancient human scientists conducted much research into the powder, and all their results indicated that it was just harmless, merely short-chain molecules, relatively simple and extremely inert, organic, yet neither alive nor capable of life. So, with those findings in mind, as any species would do, they began feeding it to their pets, a dog-like species that were known as the Faru. Reason being, the powder seemed to elicit desirable physical and psychotropic mutations in the Faru, with no apparent side effects. Although the powder had seemingly no effect on the Ancient Humans or the Ancient Prophets, the Faru saw massively improved domestic behaviour, becoming more affectionate and cleverly charismatic. This ultimately went on for centuries throughout human and prophet colonies. Faru that were treated with these rare powders even began fetching a high price on black markets outside of the control of human governments, but still, it seemed entirely harmless. However, that didn't last for very long. Unbeknownst to their owners, the molecules began attaching to key points in the Faru's genes, changing them physically, while continuing to still improve their behaviours. The primary physical change was this peculiar growth that showed up on roughly a third of the Faru treated, a loose, soft fur that grew between their shoulders, which breeders began to consider a pleasant variation, one that particularly impressed the Ancient Prophets, who happened to crossbreed them. This growth, however, would soon lead to concerning side effects. Some Faru were found grazing on it, others were seen consuming other Faru in their entirety, which was even more concerning because the Faru were natural herbivores. This seemed to activate some sort of biological timer, a signal for expansion, as very quickly the Faru stopped producing attractive mutations and instead started to sprout flexible rods from their heads, which were then also consumed by other Faru, which caused abortions and unnatural births. Try as they might, no cure could be found for these mutations, and soon the Faru were too far gone. Humans and prophets began to exterminate their pets, believing the mutations had simply been the cause of overbreeding and overspecialization. But it was far too late for countermeasures. Soon, humans started to manifest similar growths and also began to eat the Faru. Everything they touched also became infected, and discarded limbs, organs, and tissue would spread it as well. This very quickly spread cross-species again, this time from the humans to the prophets, altering behavior, but not yet causing mutations. Infected humans started to combine their resources to force other humans to become infected via cannibalism of a sacrificed individual, one induced to grow to an extreme size before being consumed while still alive. Humans and other species then began to reshape themselves into other varied and vicious forms, equipped to maim and kill, to consume, absorb, and transform. This was the beginning of the Flood. This disease spread throughout human and prophet space like wildfire, causing humans to retreat into foreigner space as their colonies were being infected, which the foreigners deemed an act of war. Eventually, the Flood receded, doing so of its own volition, but it was too late. Fighting a war on two fronts had utterly crippled the humans, who had the final nail in their coffin hammered in by the foreigners. By 106,445 BC, the Flood had seemingly vanished from the galaxy entirely, with humans and foreigners believing that the parasite had been defeated. But little did they know that this was just all part of the Flood's plan. This was just the beginning. Roughly 9,000 years then went by between the end of what I'm going to call the Human Flood-Foreigner War and the Flood's return. Despite their apparent victory, the foreigners remained vigilant during this time, conducting extensive research into Flood countermeasures to prepare for what they believed was their inevitable return. But where the Flood were first spotted again, nobody in the Ecumene predicted. In the far reaches of foreigner space, right on the edge of the galaxy, was a planet named Seaward, of which the foreigners had given the location designation of G617G. That sounds obscure, trust me, it'll be relevant in a minute. Seaward was something of a retreat for foreigners, a planet known only by a select few, where they could shed their power armor, shed their AIs and their hyper-advanced technology, and live a more simple, primitive life in a quiet part of the galaxy. One day, one of Seaward's inhabitants by the name of Soma was painting the sunset with a jet brush, which was basically a foreigner paintbrush that automatically painted what it could see. As Soma was watching the brush paint, she saw it start to paint a dark and green, sickly imperfection in front of Seaward's setting suns. Initially believing this to be a problem with the brush, some kind of glitch, she glanced up at the sky to see that very same sickly imperfection was still there, hanging in front of both of Seaward's setting suns. This imperfection was the Flood. After 9,000 years of retreat and dormancy, they had returned to the Milky Way, and the Foreigner Flood War had officially begun. Now, Seaward's designation of G617G. How is that significant? Well, in the Bible, Genesis 6:17 reads, "For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven." You know, Halo really ain't Halo without the biblical tie-ins. From Seaward, the Flood spread rapidly throughout the edges of foreigner space before moving inward. Billions, likely trillions of foreigners fell, either fleeing or fighting the parasite, with each one that fell only bolstering its numbers. An unthinkable amount of grave mines and key mines were constructed from the rotten remains of the Flood's victims, and their intelligence quickly spiraled out of control. In the end, the Halos were built, and after 300 years of war, the infection of an entire galaxy, the corruption of the Foreigner's greatest AI and military leader, and the destruction of the Greater Ark, the Halo array was fired, and the outbreak was defeated, at the cost of every living being in existence. Now then, I'm covering the outbreak on the Shield world in Halo Wars 1 called Trove early because, frankly, this outbreak makes absolutely no sense to me. Right, so the way that Shield worlds work is the exterior of the planet is typically just like any normal planet, and so everything on the surface is susceptible to the Halos. But if you're inside the Micro-Dyson sphere, which is contained within almost like the core of the planet, you are immune to the Halos. Stick with me here. So, towards the end of the Forerunner Flood War, the surface of Trove was overrun, and 3 Prometheans valiantly staved them off for long enough for the installation's damage monitor, 295 Harken Watch, to go into the planet's core and seal it off from the flood, which it succeeded in doing. However, somehow, after the Halos fired, the flood continued to exist on the surface of the Shield World, not within the Shield World in the Micro Dyson Sphere, on the surface, and were there when Regret and the Spirit of Fire arrived. How? I have no idea. An only Spartan research team that went to the wreckage of the Shield World in 2557 said that there was a 72% chance the flood outbreak there was recent, but where that came from, we can only guess. Either way, when the Spirit of Fire arrived and descended into the core of the Shield World, the flood followed them in, for the first time ever breaching what was supposed to be a safe haven from the parasite. But the outbreak on the Shield World was ultimately destroyed when Sergeant Forge valiantly gave his life to detonate the Spirit of Fire's FTL drive in the Dyson Sphere's artificial sun, blowing the planet to smithereens and leaving the Spirit of Fire to drift through space for decades. However, the outbreak wasn't entirely contained. As a kind of epilogue to the outbreak on Trove, we have the mini outbreak that happened on the Spirit of Fire between Halo Wars 1 and Halo Wars 2. There's nothing crazy here, basically just some flood from the Shield World managed to sneak on board the Spirit of Fire, and 6 years after the ending of Halo Wars 1, Serena woke Jerome up from cryo to deal with it. Using his Spartan prowess and a goddamn chair, Jerome swiftly dealt with the outbreak and then went back to cryo sleep. It's kind of like the Spartan equivalent of waking up at 3 in the morning and going downstairs for a glass of water. So if you want to quell any of the applicable infestations included in this video, then look no further than my flood-themed PCs made in partnership with Apex Gaming PCs. With the rather fittingly named Pureform, Gravemind, and Primordial builds, there's a level of PC here for every gamer to use to blast through hordes and hordes of flood at beautiful resolutions and frame rates, enough to make the precursors grin from ear to ear. Head to my link in the description to go and pick one up for yourself. Right, it's time to talk about my favourite flood outbreak of all time, the Delta Halo outbreak. Now, you might be wondering why this one is placed chronologically before Halo 1's outbreak, and, well, there's a reason for that. So, it's never touched on in Halo 2, or Halo 3, or honestly any Halo game, or even Halo book for that matter, how this outbreak started. However, by piecing together bits of evidence that are scattered throughout some ancient and incredibly nostalgic Bungie.net posts, we can come to a relatively sound reason for this outbreak happening. And it all pertains to the Halo 3 map, Cold Storage. This outbreak is a conspiracy rabbit hole, so brace yourselves. So, back in May of 2008, yes, we're going back that far, Bungie started to tease cold storage for Halo 3 through something of a mini ARG at the end of their weekly updates on Bungie.net. This ARG came in the form of an in-universe report written by Delta Halo's systems about a containment failure at the cold storage facility, which, by the way, is a flood research and containment facility that's located on Delta Halo that specialized in determining the extremophilic thresholds of flood-infected specimens. So it opens by reporting the catastrophic specimen containment failure at the facility, stating that all entries into the facility have been locked until further notice. The atmosphere has been sealed and the temperature has been lowered to halt the flood spread, and a maintenance and security detail have been requested. 24 hours then go by and there's still no detail. It then issues another report, 2,512,332 hours, or 286 years later, stating that unauthorized hostiles, likely the Flood, have breached the facility's containment protocols via its teleporter network, hence how they were able to escape the facility. So Delta Halo systems placed the terminals into recursive mode to prevent any further breaches, which is why the teleporters on the map only take you to other places within the facility and not out of it. The systems also lambast Delta Halo's monitor, 2401 Penitent Tangent, for being so lax in the areas of maintenance and security. Then it goes over a series of logs, starting out with containment checks in similar facilities on every other Halo: Alpha Halo, Beta Halo, Gamma Halo, Epsilon Halo, Zeta Halo, and Kappa Halo, all of which appear to be running perfectly fine with no containment breaches. And so, it assumes that the breach here was mechanical in nature, perhaps some kind of manufacturing flaw. Because no outside agent has accessed the facility in 874,068,942 hours, or 99,779 years, it deems sabotage unlikely. And it's this log right here why I'm mentioning Delta Halo's outbreak so early in the video. So Bungie wrote this when the Halo universe was still in the year 2552, the same year that Reach, Halo 1, 2, and 3 took place in. So, 99,779 years prior, which was when the Flood broke containment in cold storage, was 97,227 BC. That means that a mere 218 years after the Foreigners fired the Halos and ended the Foreigner Flood War, one of their monitors, who was entrusted with caretaking one of the most important installations in the galaxy, just got a bit lazy with his containment protocols and allowed another outbreak to happen. That means that the outbreak on Delta Halo was the first outbreak of the post-Forerunner era of the Halo universe. Given that it had almost 100,000 years to spread, it's honestly a goddamn miracle that the outbreak was only as big as it was. I mean, had the quarantine zone not been established around the library, it's safe to say that the entirety of Delta Halo would have been consumed. However, as we know, it was eventually freed from the quarantine zone in Halo 2 when the Arbiter so conveniently shut down the containment field, but we'll touch on that in a second. Back to the logs. Delta Halo systems continue to hold the cold storage facility at ample atmospheric and temperature conditions to halt the flood spread within, until unauthorized parties somehow managed to break into the recursive teleporter loop and access the facility. Now, when I first covered this way back in 2018, we had no idea what this species was. But now, you could quite justifiably theorize that that species was the Endless. We know for a fact that some of them weren't imprisoned by the Foreigners, they managed to escape or lay low and explored the galaxy for years trying to find a way to free the rest of their species, so maybe this is one of the many examples of them interfering or meddling with the universe to try and free their species. Anyways, back to the outbreak. The rest of the Delta Halo outbreak is history. It spread across the ring, infected High Charity, spread to Earth, spread to the Ark, and then spread to Installation 08 before being destroyed. At least mostly destroyed. We'll pick this thread back up later. Moving chronologically on, we have the outbreak that first introduced all of us to the Flood, the Alpha Halo outbreak. During the war on Installation 04, Captain Keyes extracted information out of a captured elite about a significant Foreigner weapons cache that was hidden deep within a swamp facility on the ring, and so he mustered up a team to go and investigate. Fireteam Charlie, led by Sergeant Johnson, inserted first and cleared the facility. Then, 2nd Squad, led by Corporal Lovik, arrived in Pelican V933 accompanied by Captain Keyes. 2nd Squad stayed up top to guard the entrance, and Keyes rendezvoused with Fireteam Charlie inside. As they descended deeper, they started running into dead Covenant that clearly weren't killed by any human. They were mangled, their corpses mutated, accompanied by signs of a battle that had taken place. But still, the humans went deeper, reaching a locked door to some kind of chamber. Keyes ordered Fireteam Charlie's tech specialist, Private Kappas, to hack the door with his spoofer, and the team moved inside. They immediately began hearing strange, creepy noises, and quickly 2nd Squad radioed Johnson in a state of frantic fear. They were under attack, but not by Covenant. Johnson listened as his men were horrifyingly killed over the comms, only to start hearing even creepier sounds in the very room they were in, and very quickly, the Marines were under attack by infection forms. It turned out that when the initial Covenant teams had arrived, they'd misinterpreted the containment facility as a weapons cache, and in their ignorance, had caused a containment breach. After their initial squads all fell silent, the Prophet of Stewardship, a minor prophet that was a part of the Arbiter's fleet in the Halo's orbit, tried to order another squad in, but the Arbiter, then Supreme Commander, had the Prophet reprimanded for wasting military resources. Sergeant Johnson was the only member of the initial investigation team to escape the facility alive. Private Wallace Jenkins half survived. He was infected, but the infection form that got him was so old and so decrepit that the infection process wasn't entirely successful. So Jenkins still went through all of the typical physical mutations of a combat form, except he was conscious the entire time. And even when fully infected, he was able to occasionally wrestle back control of his body from the infection form. Pretty gnarly stuff. The outbreak very quickly spread throughout the facility and then out to the surface, and in no time it was spreading all across the ring. The Monitor and the Sentinels quickly intervened with intents to fire the Halo. First, they needed the Index, and initially, before they teleported Chief to the library, they teleported a Marine by the name of Marvin Mabuto to retrieve it. Marvin actually made it surprisingly far as well, to say that he was just a regular Marine, but sadly he was eventually torn to shreds by the Flood. When Chief was taken to the library, he actually canonically found Marvin's body, and honoured him by calling him a hardcore son of a bitch. How iconic. Eventually though, as we know, Chief and Cortana detonated the Pillar of Autumn's fusion drives, which destroyed Alpha Halo, and destroyed most of its Flood outbreak. And this is the fun part of the video where I get to finally talk about the Mona Lisa. So, the Mona Lisa was a freighter ship turned prison ship that looked suspiciously similar to the USG Ishimura. And no, that's not the only Dead Space similarity with its story. It may have been turned into a prison ship, but it didn't remain a prison ship for very long. After the events of Alpha Halo, only Section 3 became aware of the existence of the Flood. Scientists within Section 3 took a particular interest in it, namely one Major John Smith. Major Smith and his team quickly seized the Mona Lisa for Section 3 with the intent to turn it into a Flood research laboratory, hoping to ultimately find a way to control and likely weaponize the parasite. So they took their newly commandeered prison ship to the debris field of Alpha Halo and retrieved Flood samples from the surface of one of its shards, and began experimenting on both the human and elite prisoners aboard. However, as is typical with classified government experiments on highly contagious zombie parasites and infections, the Flood broke containment and quickly consumed all of the Mona Lisa's crew and inmates, causing the ship to go dark. Fearing the worst, Oni sent in a team with orders to investigate the ship and initiate the Call Protocol to prevent the Proto-Gravemind on board from jumping the ship across the galaxy. But at no point did Oni actually brief the team on what the Mona Lisa was actually being used for. So, as I'm sure you can imagine, they were rather surprised to see the crew turned into zombies. The few survivors of the initial outbreak, like inmate Patrick Rimmer, cricket bat-wielding elite inmate Henry, and the shady Oni scientist John Smith, eventually ran into and teamed up with the Marines, but one by one, they began getting picked off by the parasite. John Smith managed to overpower one of the Marines and actually escaped to the nearby Prowler, the Red Horse, that the Marines came in on, making it to safety. After reaching the escape pods on the ship, it turned out that only 2 single-seater pods remained, and there were still 6 survivors on the Mona Lisa. Clarence, one of the Marines, suddenly revealed himself as an undercover Oni agent, sent in to ensure that no crew of the Mona Lisa be allowed to live so that the truth of what Oni were doing there never got out. And in doing so, he executed the inmate, Patrick. In retaliation, the injured corpseman, Benty, threw herself and Clarence into a Flood horde, which McCraw used as a distraction to take the coward's way out and steal a drop pod for himself, leaving only Sergeant Lopez and the friendly elite Henry left. After holding off more Flood, the two sealed an airlock and prepared to do battle for the final escape pod. Who survived this legendary face-off? We unfortunately don't know, but very shortly after, the Red Horse launched a Shiva tactical nuke at the Mona Lisa, annihilating everything on board, and likely also annihilating Henry and Lopez as well. The only survivors of the Mona Lisa were the coward Marine McCraw, of whom's fate is unknown, and Oni Major John Smith, of whom was court-martialed, but given his employer, it's likely that nothing significant ever happened to him. If anything, Section 3 likely allowed him to continue his research just with a different ship, and for all we know, that research may still be going on today. Speaking of Flood research, let's talk about Halo 2's other Flood outbreak that occurred at the gas mine at Threshold. So, initially the Forerunners built the gas mine to be just a gas mine, but when it was all hands on deck to research and counter the Flood, like many other installations, it was retrofitted with Flood research laboratories. And as with all other similar stations, the Flood specimens stored there were unharmed by the firing of the Halos and remained in storage until the Covenant arrived. Now, the heretics that we fight on the gas mine weren't always heretics. You see, Caesar Refme, the leader, and his warriors were actually a part of the Arbiter's fleet that followed the Pillar of Autumn to Alpha Halo from Reach. They were sent by one of the fleet's prophets on an artifact retrieval mission to the gas mine. However, they found themselves stranded when the fleet went back to High Charity without them. This abandonment, combined with the truth of the Halos and the great journey that was revealed to them by Guilty Spark, caused them to defect from the Covenant and become heretics. But when the Arbiter was sent in on his first mission alongside a lance of Spec Ops warriors, things would take a turn for the worse on the gas mine. Initial combat luckily took place in one of the arms of the mine that housed no Flood, but the heretic leader was quickly forced to flee to one that did, and in the ensuing chaos, one of his heretics released the Flood. It very quickly spread throughout the entire station. All arms of the mine were overrun, and so the Arbiter cut the cables that were suspending it, causing it and all of its Flood to plummet to the core of the gas giant Threshold, where it was crumpled by gravity. No Flood, no heretics, and very few Covenants survived this raid. But it wasn't the last time the Arbiter and Artas would encounter the parasite. Penultimately, we have the most recent Flood outbreak to be introduced into Halo's lore, the outbreak at Site-22. In 2556, IMC and the BXR Mining Corporation discovered a Forerunner ship buried within an asteroid orbiting a gas giant, and so mining teams, accompanied by IMC hazmat agents, were sent in to what was designated Site-22 to excavate it. However, shortly after making entry into the ship, it was revealed to be storing dormant Forerunner combat forms. The teams sent into the ship were quickly infected, and Flood poured out of the ship and began spreading throughout Site-22, infecting miners, hazmat agents, staff, and anything else with a nervous system. The outbreak got so bad that Fireteam Leviathan, a dedicated Spartan Flood containment squad, was sent in to contain the outbreak, but even they were overwhelmed, marking the first known Flood infection of a Spartan in UNSC history. As a result, both Corruptor and Upsilon protocols were declared over local UNSC channels. Any survivors in the area were given 7 minutes to evacuate before the UNSC Saturn unleashed an orbital bombardment of MAC rounds and fusion warheads on the area to prevent the Spartans and their Mjolnir from falling into Flood possession. However, in those 7 minutes, some combat forms managed to commandeer a Condor and escaped the destruction of Site-22. Where this ship went and what its status is 4 years later in the modern Halo universe is unknown. And finally, picking up where we left off with the Delta Halo outbreak, we have the most chronologically recent Flood outbreak in Halo lore, the High Charity Quarantine Zone outbreak that occurred on the Ark in Halo Wars 2. So, at the end of Halo 3, when Chief fired Installation 08, because the Halo wasn't fully constructed, its pulse wasn't 100% effective. I mean, it was literally tearing itself apart as it was firing, so this isn't really too much of a surprise. It's like firing a gun with only half a barrel. It's not really going to be the most accurate. As a consequence, not all of the Flood within the ruins of High Charity on the Ark were destroyed. Fast forward 7 years to the war between the Spirit of Fire and the Banished on the Ark, Atriox sends 2 of his lieutenants, Pavium and Voridus, to scour the area around High Charity for supplies, but they defy his one and only order to not breach the quarantine shield. They do so with a Scarab and release hordes and hordes of Flood, initiating an outbreak on the Ark. Very quickly, the Flood began constructing a proto-Gravemind, whilst the Banished hurried into the Ark's maintenance tunnels to reactivate the installation's Sentinels. With the Sentinels back online, Pavium and Voridus continue their annihilation of the parasite until they reach the proto-Gravemind, which is absolutely massive at this point, very dangerously close to becoming a full Gravemind. But thankfully, with enough firepower, they're able to destroy it. and with the help of the Sentinels, the outbreak is contained and presumably the quarantine shield around High Charity is patched up. That said though, whether any more Flood continue to lurk within the Holy City's remains is unknown. And that, my friends, is, at least to the best of my knowledge, every single Flood outbreak that has ever occurred in Halo's universe. I think I got them all. I really tried to. I spent ages making sure that I didn't miss one out. I don't think I did, but you know what? If I did, make sure you leave it in the comments. Oh, and also, whilst you're down there, leave your favourite Flood outbreak in the comments as well. And so, with that said, I'm going to round this very long, very in-depth video out here. I want to give a massive thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual, and thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll catch you all in the next one.